I'm Lena Carter. And the day I buried the only person who ever truly saw me, my family was across town, clinking champagne glasses at my sister's birthday brunch. No phone call, no flowers, just silence. They didn't show up for the funeral, but they showed up for the will. They thought they'd walk away with everything. What they didn't know was that Grandma Evelyn had already seen everything that mattered. If you've ever been the one left out, the one who gave quietly while others took loudly, this story is for you. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the loudest revenge is simply choosing peace. I grew up in Ashbury, Oregon, where the trees were tall, the rain was constant, and in our house, my presence was quiet enough to forget. From the time I was old enough to notice, I knew I wasn't the center of anyone's orbit. That spot belonged to my younger sister, Sloane. She was 2 years younger, but she sparkled like she was born under a spotlight. Even as a toddler, Sloane could steal a room with her laugh. She had the kind of energy that made people turn their heads, lean in, and stay. She was the dancer, the lead in school plays, the girl in matching outfits with our mother at every Christmas card photo. And well, I was the one behind the camera, holding the box of props, waiting quietly on the sidelines with a sketchbook in my lap. Our parents, Daniel and Vivian Carter, adored her, not in the cruel, intentional way that some people favor a child, but in the soft, unconscious ways that cut even deeper. They celebrated her loudness. They organized their lives around her schedules, her recitals, her birthdays. I became skilled at taking up as little space as possible. I didn't want to compete. I just wanted to be seen. On my 8th birthday, I asked for a very specific set of colored pencils, artist grade, with dozens of shades. I had circled the ad in the store flyer and left it on the kitchen counter for days. When the morning came, I sat at the table, my knees bouncing with excitement. There was a gift. Just one. A plain gray sweater folded neatly in a box. "We thought you needed something warm," my mother said. Later that day, I watched her slip a $20 bill into Sloane's hand for a movie outing. My pencil set had cost 10. Small cuts like that don't bleed. They bruise. Quietly. They accumulate. But the worst memory, the one that still knots something deep in my chest, was the Christmas I was 10. Sloane had asked for a bike, a pink one with tassels and glitter on the seat. Our parents saved up for months to get it. I asked for an easel, something simple, so I could keep my drawings off the floor. Christmas morning, the bike was there, bright pink, with a red bow and silver handlebars that sparkled under the lights. Sloane screamed with joy. Everyone clapped. My gift was a thin, flat box. Inside a cheap watercolor set from the discount store, the brushes were plastic. The paint flaked at the edges. "We thought you'd like this," Dad said, eyes already back on Sloane, who was attempting to ride her new bike through the hallway. That was how it always went. No cruelty, just consistent dismissal. As if my needs, my passions, were nice little hobbies, side notes in the story of our family. And somehow, I believed it. I thought being overlooked was my role, that fading into the background was easier than asking to be held. But even the quiet ones remember everything. And one day, they stop asking to be seen. They start building something no one can ignore. If I was invisible inside my parents' house, then Grandma Evelyn's home was where I finally had form, where I had weight, voice, and color. Her little blue house sat quietly by the edge of Clearwater Lake, wrapped in ivy and the smell of cinnamon. It was only 20 minutes from our house, but it felt like a different world. There were no dress codes, no noise about achievements, no pressure to shine, just the soft creak of old floorboards, the hum of a kettle always on the stove, and the way Grandma looked at me, like I was enough just by being there. She saw me. I don't mean she simply noticed me when I walked in. I mean, she looked me in the eye and stayed there. She asked questions that lingered. She waited for real answers. When I showed her my sketchbook, she didn't just glance and nod. She held it with both hands, brought it close to her glasses, and studied every pencil line like it mattered. "Look at this," she'd whisper, brushing her fingers over the page like it was sacred. "You captured the light in this leaf. Lena, that's not easy to do. You're seeing something most people miss." She bought me my first real paintbrush, the kind that held water without dripping. She gave it to me wrapped in a scarf from her dresser drawer, said it had belonged to her when she was young. Every artist deserves the right tools. She told me, even if the world hands them plastic and says, "This will do." My parents never came to see the little gallery that bloomed inside her house. But Grandma Evelyn framed one of my charcoal sketches, a quiet scene of the lake at dusk, and hung it next to an oil painting she'd bought at a local gallery. When I protested, told her it didn't belong there, she turned to me and said, gently but firmly, "It belongs because I say it does, just like you." She never talked badly about my parents, not once, but in everything she did. The way she made space for me at her table, the way she saved my drawings in a folder labeled Lena's Masterpieces. She was rewriting the story I thought I had to live with. She didn't try to fix the way my parents treated me. She just loved me louder. Sometimes I'd bike to her house after school, pretending I needed help with homework just to breathe that air again. We'd sit on the porch and drink tea, even when I was too young to like it. And when I cried, she never rushed me. She'd just sit with me through the silence until I was ready to speak. "You don't have to shout to be strong," she said once, brushing my hair behind my ear. "Sometimes, strength is in the stillness." One summer, I told her I was thinking of quitting art club, that it didn't seem to matter, that I wasn't going to get into any fancy programs anyway. She didn't say a word. She stood up, went into her bedroom, and came back with a brochure, a summer art program at the state university. "Let them tell you no," she said, placing it in front of me. "But don't you be the one to tell yourself that first." She paid the application fee out of her own pocket, and when I got in, she clapped her hands like I'd won a Nobel Prize. That summer changed everything. In that program, surrounded by other kids who spoke the same language of color and line, I felt for the first time like maybe I belonged somewhere. And every night I called her from the dorm, she'd ask, "What did you see today that others missed to the world?" Grandma Evelyn was a sweet old woman with a love for gardening and poetry. But to me, she was a lifeline, the one person who saw the artist before the art, the girl before the woman, the soul behind the silence. And while my family framed Sloane's homecoming crown and football game tickets, Grandma Evelyn framed my worth, quietly, deliberately, and without asking anyone else's permission. By the time I turned 15, I had learned to carry my victories quietly. The louder I tried to celebrate them, the more obvious it became that no one was really listening. When I won second place in a regional art competition, $200, and a certificate signed by a panel of working artists, I rushed home clutching the envelope like it was made of gold leaf. My fingers smudged the ink from how tightly I'd held it during the bus ride. I walked into the living room to find my parents on the couch, watching Sloane's cheerleading competition on TV for what had to be the third time. "Mom, Dad, look," I said, breathless. I placed in the regional showcase. There were over 100 entries. I held out the certificate like it was a piece of myself. My dad glanced at it briefly, smiled, and said, "Oh, that's great, honey. Good job." His eyes never left the screen. My mom didn't even look. "That's nice. Lena, can you quiet down? This is Sloane's big solo." I stood there for a moment, still holding the certificate out, as if maybe they'd change their minds, maybe the words would register, but they didn't. I quietly folded the paper and walked to my room, placed it in the bottom drawer beneath my sketch pads, and sat on the edge of my bed, heart thudding with a disappointment too old for my age. Later that week, I heard my father on the phone with my uncle. He was talking about college plans, career paths. Yeah, Sloane's got a real future, he said. She's got the charisma. You know, people are drawn to her. Lena. Well, she's a sweet kid, but she's always in her head with that drawing stuff. I told her. Focus on something practical. It wasn't anger that hit me. It was that cold kind of numb that sinks into your stomach and stays. I told Grandma Evelyn that weekend. I sat at her kitchen table, the smell of fresh muffins in the air, and cried without needing to explain why. She listened without interrupting. When the silence settled, she didn't rush to fix it. She simply got up, walked into her study, and returned with a brochure. It was for a scholarship-based summer art residency at the State University, a step above the program I'd attended years earlier. You're not just talented, she said, placing it gently in front of me. You're serious, and you deserve to be taken seriously. She filled out the forms with me, helped me choose which pieces to include in my portfolio, and covered the shipping costs to send it off. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't need another half-hearted nod or another reminder to be realistic. I just sent the application and waited. When the acceptance letter came, I didn't run home with it. I went to Grandma's instead. We danced in her kitchen to an old jazz record, spinning between the stove and sink like children. She clapped and kissed my forehead, then framed the letter and hung it next to my artwork in her hallway. That was the summer I stopped hoping for applause from the people who'd never learned how to clap for me. I poured everything into my residency, the long studio hours, the critiques, and the peer workshops. I found myself surrounded by people who understood the language I spoke, the quiet, visual one made of shadow, texture, and line. But even then, when I returned home, it was Sloane's back-to-school party that took center stage. A rented hall, balloons, her name in cursive gold letters across the wall. I stood in the corner, smiling when appropriate, answering questions politely. No one asked about my summer. No one noticed the small, quiet change in me, the shift that said I wasn't waiting anymore. Only Grandma Evelyn noticed. And somehow, that made it enough. Illness doesn't arrive like thunder. It creeps in softly, the way dusk turns into night. You don't notice how dark it's become until you're already standing in it. At first, it was just a cough. Dry, persistent. Nothing to worry about, Grandma Evelyn said, but then it lingered. Turned into fatigue, shortness of breath, quiet pain that stole across her ribs in the early hours of the morning. The diagnosis came in quiet tones from a doctor who didn't meet our eyes. Lung cancer. Late stage. No cure. Just time. And so I gave her mine. I was 23, living in a one-bedroom apartment over a bakery, and taking community college classes while waitressing part-time. But every afternoon, after my shift, I went straight to the little blue house by the lake. I'd bring fresh flowers, soup in thermoses, sometimes just my silence. She didn't need entertainment. She just needed someone to hold her hand when the world grew too heavy. I read to her, rubbed her back during the nights she couldn't sleep. We sorted through old photo boxes when her hands still had strength, laughing at faded memories, both of us pretending the clock wasn't ticking. Her TV gathered dust. She said she preferred the sound of my voice anyway. My parents came once, Sloane too. They stayed 10 minutes, brought a bouquet from the grocery store and stood near the window, checking their phones. My mom complained about the hospital smell. My dad asked the nurse when Evelyn would be back on her feet. Sloane barely looked up. They left without hugging her. Evelyn didn't mention it afterward. But I saw how she folded the untouched bouquet and tossed it in the trash after they left. She passed away on a Tuesday morning, just after sunrise. I was there, sitting beside her bed, holding her hand as her breath grew softer, slower, then stopped. It was not dramatic. It was simply final. I made the calls, called my father first. She's gone, I said, voice hollow. There was a pause. Then, okay. Well, we knew this was coming. In the background, I heard my mother asking what was wrong. Your mom, he said. She passed. Muffled voices, some shifting, then back to me. Grace. We'll take it from here. Go home. Get some rest. But they didn't take it from there. They didn't call the funeral home. They didn't write the obituary. Every decision, every form, every phone call fell to me. I moved through those days like a sleepwalker, numb and functioning. The funeral was set for Saturday morning. On Thursday, my mom called. Her voice was too cheerful. Lena, sweetie, we need to talk about the date. I paused. What about it? Well, she said, Saturday is Sloane's 25th. We've had the brunch planned for months. Friends flying in, a big reservation at that French place downtown. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. We just don't think we can make the funeral, she continued. But we'll come by the grave next week. I promise. I hung up without another word. Not in anger, just in surrender. Something inside me broke quietly, like a thread snapping under too much weight. The final illusion I had clung to, that maybe, one day, I'd matter to them, was gone. That Saturday, under a gray sky spitting light rain, I stood alone at the edge of Grandma Evelyn's grave. A few of her neighbors came, one or two cousins, a minister. That was it. I was the one who greeted guests, the one who lowered her into the earth, the one who whispered goodbye. And somewhere across Ashbury, in a chandelier-lit brunch hall, my parents were toasting mimosas, laughing, celebrating Sloane. That was the moment I knew. The love I had been given, quiet, unwavering, real, was gone. And the people I had hoped would show up for me never would. Grief doesn't always sound like sobbing. Sometimes, it's the silence that follows, the kind that presses against your chest and refuses to move. After Grandma Evelyn's funeral, the house by the lake sat still. Her teacup stayed on the counter for 3 days. I couldn't bring myself to wash it. The Monday after the burial, I went back to my apartment, sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the floor for hours. My phone buzzed once. Dad. Then again. Mom. Then Sloane. I didn't answer. I didn't delete their messages. I didn't even read them. I just let the screen dim until it all faded away. No final statement. No dramatic goodbye post. No accusatory email. I didn't need to declare anything. I was done hoping for something that would never come. For most of my life, I had chased their attention like a child running after a balloon in the wind. Always out of reach. Always just one step from being noticed. But that morning at Evelyn's grave, something in me stopped running. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just emptied. Worn down to something sharp and quiet. They didn't notice I had disappeared. Not right away. A week passed. Then 2. The texts got longer. The voicemails started sounding frustrated. My dad's voice, once flat and detached, now had an edge. You need to stop ignoring us. Lena, this isn't how families behave. But the truth was, I wasn't behaving like family anymore. Because I didn't feel like I had one. Silence became my shield. It was the only boundary they could not twist. The only wall they couldn't push through with guilt or charm or confusion. When they called again, I let it ring. When my mom sent a photo of Sloane blowing out candles with the caption, "Wish you were here," I looked at it for a full minute before deleting it. I started spending more time at the lake house. It wasn't mine. Not legally. Not yet. But I kept the garden trimmed, aired the sheets, and opened the windows. I sat in Grandma's chair and read her poetry books out loud. as if she might still be listening. Some days, I cleaned just to move. Other days, I sat still for hours. The air there didn't ask anything of me. It just let me be. Grief, I learned, isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes, it tells you exactly who never deserved your voice to begin with. By the end of that month, the text slowed. The voicemails stopped. Not because they understood, but because I had stopped responding. And silence, when used right, becomes unmistakable. It was the first time I wasn't begging to be seen. The first time I chose my peace over their permission. The letter arrived in a cream-colored envelope, thicker than most mail, with my name written in elegant script. The return address read Whitaker and Sons, Estate Law, Ashbury. I knew what it was before I even opened it. It had been just over a month since the funeral. The house by the lake was still quiet, still wrapped in the kind of stillness that only follows final goodbyes. I'd started going there more often, not to claim it, but to care for it, to be close to her. Inside the envelope was a formal invitation, a reading of Grandma Evelyn's will, scheduled for the following Friday at 10 a.m. at Mr. Whitaker's office downtown. I wasn't surprised. I knew Evelyn would have had her affairs in order. What surprised me was that the letter was addressed only to me. The next day, I got a call from the office confirming my attendance. The rest of the family has been contacted separately. The receptionist said politely, "But Ms. Evelyn asked that you receive this personally." Something tightened in my chest. A knot of anticipation laced with dread. I wasn't expecting anything. Evelyn had always lived simply. A modest savings, a pension, the house, maybe a few keepsakes. The truth was, I would have come even if she'd left me nothing. Friday came too quickly. I walked into Mr. Whitaker's office and immediately saw them, my parents and Sloane, already seated around a polished wood table. My father looked impatient, tapping his fingers against the chair arm. My mother wore a stiff smile, the kind meant for strangers. And Sloane, in a new designer coat, scrolled on her phone like this was another brunch reservation she'd been dragged to. They didn't acknowledge me. Not a nod. Not a word. I took the seat furthest from them. The air was heavy with expectation, like everyone was waiting for applause that hadn't started yet. Mr. Whitaker entered with a leather folder and a small laptop. He greeted us warmly, as if unaware of the frost in the room. "Thank you all for coming, Ms. Evelyn Carter left clear and detailed instructions. We'll begin with a few charitable bequests." He listed off small donations. A check for the local library, another for the animal shelter. My father shifted in his chair. My mother adjusted her scarf. Even Sloane looked up. Finally, when he said, "And now, the remainder of the estate," he turned the page. To be clear, this includes the property at 17 Clearwater Drive, all personal belongings, savings accounts, investments, and the contents of the safety deposit box. My breath caught. Mr. Whitaker continued, calm and certain. "Ms. Evelyn Carter has named her sole heir and beneficiary, her granddaughter, Lena Carter." Silence. Not the stunned kind, the gutted kind. I didn't look at them. I could feel their shock pulsing across the table like heat. My father's fingers froze mid-tap. My mother's face drained of color. Sloane opened her mouth, then closed it again. All of it, my dad said after a moment, his voice brittle. "Yes," Mr. Whitaker replied. "In full." "No, that's not." Sloane shot up in her chair. "She wouldn't do that. I was her favorite." Mr. Whitaker adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Carter was very clear. This was her final, deliberate decision. I sat still, hands folded in my lap. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel anything at all. Not yet. Because this wasn't about the money or the house. It was about truth, finally being written down, notarized, and read aloud in a room where silence had once swallowed me whole. The silence that followed Mr. Whitaker's announcement was deep and sharp, like the kind that hangs in the air right after glass shatters. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the air in the room seemed to hesitate. Then Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat gently. "There's one more item," he said. "Ms. Carter left a recorded message. She asked that it be played at the reading." He reached over and turned the laptop toward the center of the table, the screen glowing softly in the dim light. "She wanted you all to hear this together." He pressed play. There she was, Grandma Evelyn, sitting in her favorite armchair by the bay window, wrapped in the quilt I'd made her during my last summer at the residency. The light filtered through the lace curtains just as it always had. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. Her face looked tired, but her eyes, those sharp, kind, unwavering eyes, were steady as ever. "Hello," she said, her voice faint but full. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone. And I hope this message finds you well." She paused, breathing in, then continued. "There are things I want to say now, things I think need to be said out loud." Her gaze lifted, looking directly into the lens, to Daniel and Vivian. She began. "My parents, for years, I watched you raise two daughters. I watched how one was placed at the center of everything, while the other became the background. I watched you celebrate every loud moment Sloane ever had, and overlook every quiet achievement Lena worked so hard for. You didn't mean harm, I know, but neglect doesn't need intent to leave scars." My mother let out a soft noise, somewhere between a gasp and a protest. But Evelyn continued without flinching. "You saw charm and sparkle, but you missed character. You praised ambition but ignored endurance. You told Lena to be more practical, when all she ever needed was to be seen." She shifted slightly, adjusting the quilt. Her tone changed, gentler, but firmer. "To Sloane," she said. And I watched my sister stiffen beside me. "I hope one day you'll understand that love is not owed, it's earned. You were always surrounded by it, but you never had to fight for it. Lena did, and in doing so, she became something you never quite learned how to be, present. She showed up when it was inconvenient. She gave without expecting credit. She stood by me in silence, when I didn't have the words to ask for help." Then Evelyn's eyes found the camera again, softening. "And to you, Lena," she said. My heart clenched. "My quiet, steady girl. You were my greatest comfort in my last chapter. You didn't need to prove anything. You just loved me. You gave me your time, your strength, and your kindness, without condition. That is why I've left everything to you. Not because I loved the others less, but because you gave more than anyone ever asked of you. And I want you to have the means to live the life they once tried to talk you out of." Her voice trembled for the first time, but she didn't look away. "Fill that house with light and color. Use it to make something beautiful. And when you doubt your worth, remember this: I saw you, all along." The screen faded to black. No music, no final line, just silence. But this time, the silence didn't swallow me. It surrounded them, because now the truth wasn't just mine. It was on record, spoken, unshakable, and no one at that table could pretend they hadn't heard it. The room didn't erupt immediately. It cracked. The silence after the video wasn't peace. It was the kind of stillness that comes just before something gives way. My father's face flushed deep red, jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jump in his cheek. My mother sat frozen, lips parted slightly, as if trying to form a defense but forgetting how. It was Sloane who broke first. "No," she snapped, pushing back her chair so hard it screeched against the hardwood floor. "No, that's not right. I was supposed to get the lake house. We talked about it. Grandma said we'd throw parties there. She told me I could redesign the kitchen." Her voice pitched higher with every word, hands flying as if outrage alone could undo a legal document. Mr. Whitaker didn't flinch. He simply folded the will and placed it back in its folder. "Ms. Carter's instructions were final," he said. "The estate belongs entirely to Ms. Lena Carter. This is manipulation," my father hissed, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. "You were the one feeding her pills and ideas and guilt. You twisted her mind while she was sick. You preyed on her emotions." My hands remained in my lap. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him, at the man who had dismissed me for most of my life, and said quietly, "She left it to me because I was there. And you weren't. That was all." I didn't need to defend what had already been proven. I didn't need to match their rage, or their disbelief, or their grasping at the pieces of a reality they'd built without me in it. Sloane tried again, her voice cracking now. "You think you deserve that house, that money?" She pitied you. "Lena, that's all this is. She felt bad you didn't have anything else. So she threw you a bone. It's not fair." I turned to her. For the first time, I really looked at her. Not the curated version my parents had paraded around, but the person underneath, angry, unmoored, and so sure she was owed something simply for existing. "She gave it to the person who showed up," I said softly. "That's all." My mother's voice came next, quieter, but laced with something raw. "Lena, can't we talk about this privately? As a family?" That word used to ache. Now, it meant nothing more than shared DNA. I stood up, slowly, smoothly. My chair barely made a sound. I gathered my bag, nodded once to Mr. Whitaker, and turned toward the door. No one stopped me. No one followed. I didn't storm out. I didn't cry. I walked, measured, certain, because I had nothing left to prove, and they had nothing left to take. The first time I unlocked the door to the lake house as its owner, the key trembled slightly in my hand. Not from fear, just the weight of what it meant. This was no longer just a refuge, no longer the place I ran to when I needed air. It was home, entirely mine, not borrowed, not temporary, not conditional. I walked through the front door slowly, letting my fingers trail along the familiar grooves in the wood paneling, the soft dip in the armrest of Grandma Evelyn's favorite chair, the faint scent of cinnamon that still lingered, woven into the curtains and the cushions like memory stitched into fabric. I didn't rearrange the house, not right away. I didn't need to change it to feel like I belonged. Instead, I moved through the rooms like someone relearning the shape of their own skin. I opened the windows, let the wind move through the quiet. I spoke aloud to the stillness. Some days, I said nothing at all, just let the silence cradle me like her hands used to. But the garage was where transformation began. It had always been a cluttered storage space, filled with old tools, rusted garden furniture, cardboard boxes marked someday. But I saw something else. I saw light, potential, a blank canvas that wasn't asking permission. With a portion of the inheritance, I hired a contractor to open up the space. White walls, high ceilings, and tall windows that looked out onto the lake. I chose everything with care, not for aesthetics, but for intention. A place built not just to work, but to feel. I bought a professional easel, a real one, not something secondhand from a flea market or a dusty corner of a supply store. A solid walnut frame, heavy, permanent. I stocked shelves with pigments and handmade brushes, canvas rolls and charcoal. And then, one afternoon, I stood in the center of the room and began. The first stroke was clumsy, my hand too tight, my breath too shallow. But with every line, every layer of color, something shifted. It wasn't just art, it was grief, poured out one brushstroke at a time. Anger softened into shadow. Loneliness found its shape in light. The outlines of healing started to form, not just on canvas, but inside me. After a few weeks, I opened an online shop, quietly. No big announcement, just a few prints, a handful of original pieces. I told myself I didn't care if they sold, but when the first order came through, someone from Minnesota, buying a watercolor of the lake at dawn, I cried. Not because of the money, but because someone I didn't know had seen beauty in something I'd made. Orders trickled in, then picked up. A blogger stumbled onto my work, wrote a piece calling it soft, haunting, deeply human. I started getting requests, commissions from people wanting portraits, landscapes, memories turned into color. I was still alone, but I wasn't invisible anymore. Each day I stepped into that studio, I left something behind: grief, shame, the ache of being forgotten. And each painting I sent into the world was a piece of truth that something quiet, when nurtured, can become something unshakable. It started with a question I whispered into the stillness one night, sitting alone in the studio, paint drying beneath my fingernails. What would Evelyn want me to do with this? Not the house, not the inheritance, but the space, the peace, the freedom. She hadn't just left me a home, she'd left me a chance. And I knew she'd never meant for it to stop with me. That winter, I created the Evelyn Carter Art Fund, a small endowment at first, just enough to provide art supplies, mentorship, and weekend workshops for under-resourced teens in the Ashbury area. I set aside part of the garage as a teaching space, cleared out a corner for shared materials, and designed the program around what I had needed most when I was their age: not praise, not performance, but permission. To be different, to feel deeply, to make something beautiful out of the quiet. Word spread slowly, like everything worthwhile does. A few local schools signed on, then a community center, and before long, there were kids knocking on the studio door every Saturday morning. Shy at first, until they saw the brushes and canvases and realized this place was for them. And then came Margaret. She lived 2 doors down in a pale yellow cottage with ivy on the windowsills and the kind of garden that bloomed even in October. One afternoon, I found a basket of tomatoes and wildflowers on my porch, wrapped in a kitchen towel with a note. "Welcome to the neighborhood. Your grandmother spoke of you often." That was all. She began stopping by on her morning walks. We'd talk over tea or lean across the fence trading stories. She never pried, never asked about the family I no longer mentioned. She just listened. Some days, she helped prep canvases for the workshop. Other days, she brought fresh cookies and told stories about Evelyn in her younger years, how she used to dance barefoot in the rain, how she once painted the mailbox blue just because she liked the color better than black. Margaret became the aunt I'd always wished existed, the kind who remembers your favorite kind of jam and never corrects your silence. And then came Jasmine. She was a junior at Ashbury State, majoring in nonprofit management, with a side passion for community art. She reached out after seeing the blog feature about my work and asked if I needed help organizing the fund. I said yes before the email was even finished. She was bright, efficient, endlessly enthusiastic. What I'd built on instinct and emotion, she helped refine into a program that could grow. She created a budget, helped me apply for grants, built a website, and recruited volunteers. But more than that, She saw me. Not just the artist. The person. We laughed often. Worked late. Argued about paint brands and newsletter fonts. Somewhere in all of it, we became friends. The kind who remember birthdays. Who don't flinch when you get quiet. Who show up because they want to, not because they have to. My world, once narrow and dim, was now full of color, not just on canvas, but in conversation, in connection, in the quiet joy of being chosen, not out of obligation, but out of love. This was my family now. A woman with kind eyes and a weathered garden, a student with big dreams and a stubborn heart, and a dozen teens learning to make sense of their pain with pencils and paint. It wasn't loud, it wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and it was enough. The fundraiser was held on what would have been Evelyn's birthday. The lawn behind the lake house was dotted with easels and folding chairs. Children laughed as they dipped brushes into plastic palettes. Teen artists stood proudly beside their work, talking to guests about color choices and inspiration. Margaret was at the lemonade table, handing out cookies with a smile. Jasmine, clipboard in hand, directed volunteers and checked off silent auction bids with the precision of someone born to lead. And I moved through it all like someone finally at home. The house was full, not just of people, but of light. Every room held laughter, conversation, and the subtle hum of something Evelyn would have called belonging. Her framed photograph sat on the welcome table next to a vase of wildflowers and a hand-painted sign, the Evelyn Carter Art Fund, honoring creative roots. I was halfway through a conversation with a donor when I saw them. At the edge of the gravel path, near the driveway, stood my parents. And Sloane. They looked out of place. My father with his arms crossed, surveying the crowd like it was a boardroom he hadn't been invited to. Sloane in a crisp white blazer, her lips tight, eyes scanning everything, the decorations, the smiling guests, the house. And my mother, Vivian, holding a small purse in front of her like a peace offering. I felt the old knot stir in my chest, but it didn't tighten. Instead, I took a breath and kept walking. They didn't approach until later, after most of the guests had filtered inside for the art presentation. I was on the back porch, adjusting a string of lights, when I turned and found my mother standing just a few feet away. "Lena," she said, her voice cautious. "This is amazing. What you've done here. The kids, the program, the house. It's beautiful." I nodded. "Thank you." She hesitated. "We're proud of you, even if we didn't always understand." The words I had once ached to hear now landed softly, like rain on a sealed window. I heard them, but they didn't reach me, not anymore. "I'm not angry," I said quietly, and realized, with some surprise, that it was true. The rage had burned out long ago. What remained wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. "I just don't need to be invisible to feel whole anymore." Her face fell, gently, as if she'd been hoping for something else. A reunion, a tearful embrace, maybe even forgiveness. But I didn't owe her that. Not today. Not anymore. Sloane lingered behind her, watching the crowd through narrowed eyes. I caught her staring at the studio windows, where a group of teens were laughing, holding up a large canvas they'd painted together. She didn't say a word. My father didn't look at me at all, just stood with his hands in his pockets, as if he'd stumbled into a version of reality he no longer recognized. I didn't ask them to leave, but I didn't invite them to stay. I simply smiled, calm, steady, and turned back to the porch, to the lights, to the life I had built. They had come thinking this was a stage, but I wasn't performing anymore, and they no longer held the script. The guests had gone. The lawn was quiet. And inside the lake house, Only the soft clink of glass being washed and the whisper of late-night breeze through the open window remained. I slipped into the studio alone. The lights were low, the air still faintly scented with turpentine and wildflowers. I sat at the stool by the window, facing the lake. Outside, the water shimmered beneath the moonlight, smooth, unbothered. This was the part no one talks about. Not the confrontation, not the will, but the stillness that comes after. For so long, I thought revenge had to be loud, that it had to look like triumph or sound like applause. But sitting there, in a studio I built with my own hands, surrounded by artwork that had healed more than it had proven, I understood. This was it. This was the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't demand they hurt, only that I no longer do. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at them. Not at the years lost. Not even at the silence that used to hollow me out. The rage had served its purpose. It lit the path. But it was peace that carried me home. Outside, the wind shifted through the trees, and the lake caught every bit of that silver light. I thought of Evelyn, her hands folding mine, her voice telling me, "You don't have to shout to be strong." She was right. I didn't need their apologies to feel whole. I didn't need their permission to shine. Because I wasn't invisible anymore. Not to the world. Not to the people who chose me. And most of all, not to myself. My quiet revenge wasn't their downfall. It was this life, this home, this light. The kind no one gave me. The kind I built myself. Drop a comment and tell me, who was your Grandma Evelyn? The one who saw you when no one else did. And if this story touched something in you, don't forget to like and subscribe, because the world needs more quiet strength, and maybe someone out there needs to hear your story next.